Hello everyone, my name is Sniping is Fun, and I welcome you back to the long-anticipated results of a Your List survey I did many months ago, calculated the results for, and then never brought them on YouTube. It was really kind of sad. But two Your Lists I had voted for earlier this year were Pokemon related, and I asked all of you on YouTube, and I asked people on Facebook, I asked people I worked with, and so on and so forth. I asked a lot of different people. The Pokemon generations, what you think were the best Pokemon generation and the worst Pokemon generation. This is going to be the worst Pokemon generation because I want to end on something more positive, so I'll talk about the best Pokemon generations next time. But this is a top 8 list, your top 8 list, as voted on by people from the internet, from Facebook and YouTube and all that other jazz. And I calculated the results. I have the results in front of me right now, which I'm going to be revealing to you guys throughout the videos. And I have to say beforehand, before I even get into really talking about the results, my God, this actually is first off, it's very telling from Pokemon fans in terms of how they view the Pokemon series and all the different generations we've had so far. And it's also kind of interesting is it's a little bit of a twist. Like some generations I thought would get more votes for the best one. Some generations I thought would probably get least votes for the worst one. It's telling for the fan base, but it's also kind of like interesting because it's a little twist and turns. Like some of the stuff that you would not expect the fan base, because the Pokemon fan base is very, very, very vocal about what they like and dislike about the Pokemon games in the different generations we've had since the Generation 1 back in the late 90s on the Game Boy. But also it's obvious like some of this stuff you're going to be able to tell because if you've been in the Pokemon fandom at all in that time, you know exactly what generations people like and what generations people don't. But then you also are going to see some stuff in here that is a little bit surprising that maybe you don't see all that often in the Pokemon fan base. So let's get this started with, this will be not even mine, your top 8 worst Pokemon generations, because obviously there's 8 generations, so it has to be a top 8 list. It's all 8 generations. And as I did with the voting, I asked people to vote what's the best and what's the worst. So obviously I'm talking about all 8 generations in both lists, but this list is going to be what people consider to be the worst generation, and which votes were tallied towards the worst generation. So with that being said, numbers 8 and 7 actually are a tie, and they are 2 generations you probably would expect to be kind of, lower on the list of worst, because a lot of people tend to like these generations, and they are Generation 3 with 4 votes, and with 4 votes also, Generation 2, Gen 2 and Gen 3, Johto's games, Gold and Silver, and Hoenn's games, Ruby and Sapphire, and then obviously like Emerald and Crystal. And when I did this vote, just so you guys know, so you know ahead of time, for those of you that didn't catch it, or didn't see the video, or didn't vote on it, this was based off every game's original release. I told people, do not consider the remakes. You can't consider Heart Gold. You can't consider, Soul Silver, Fire Red, Leaf Green, Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire and all that stuff. It has to be the straight original games, because some of these games don't have remakes yet, so it's a little bit unfair to include them. So you have to include from the get-go. Also, it's about, when I say generation, I mean the region at the time. So when I say generations 3 and 2, I'm talking about Johto and Hoenn. I'm not talking about like, generation 3 includes the generation 1 remakes. I've always kind of been indifferent on that. That's a little weird to me to include those in that. I just consider them as Gen 1 remakes, not part of Generation 3. That's just how I work it, whatever. Technically they are, yes and no. But both of them got 4 votes for the worst. So some people out there consider Generations 3 and Generations 2 to be some of the worst Pokemon generations, and the worst Pokemon generation. I don't personally see that, because those are probably my 2 favorite generations. So to see them this low on the list actually is, is very, something I saw coming. I've seen these 2 generations being ones that didn't get a whole lot of, would be ones that wouldn't get a whole lot of votes voted for negative. But a lot of people, from what I remember, like seeing the results on Facebook, seeing the comments on YouTube and whatnot, a lot of people didn't like Generation 3 because it was kind of like almost a start over for the series. Like Generation 2 jumped over Generation 1 and pretty much include all Generation 1 Kanto Pokemon and then jump down to Johto Pokemon. Hoenn started almost fresh, had some of the older Pokemon, but then it was mostly a new game, so it was like less Pokemon, less content. It was like that was like the Game Boy Color off the Game Boy Advance, without Game Boy Color off the Game Boy original. But the Game Boy Advance was like a new system. It was like new hardware. They had to start fresh, and it was a new game. And I think a lot of people didn't really like, it being like less of a game. Also, like, some people didn't really like the Pokemon of that region or Hoenn itself and the story of like the land and the water and Team Magma versus Team Aqua. A lot of people put that together, saying they had some of the weakest teams in the of all the generations. And to be fair, that's kind of true to some extent. And just like having to travel all the water, which a lot of people hate traveling in water on Pokemon games and whatnot. So that was one reason. I definitely remember people mentioning about Gen 3. They didn't really like the region. They really didn't like Hoenn all that much, at least how it was handled, the water versus the land kind of thing. And Gen 2, I guess I recall people just saying, it just didn't feel like Generation 1. Like they loved Generation 1 so much, they didn't really like. I think Gen 2 was just kind of a retread to some extent because you went back to Kanto, and they really didn't like all the Generation 2 Pokemon or some of the evolutionary lines. Like, these were two generations that people didn't really have too many reasons for. They just voted for it, and that was it. So really, I don't have too much to go off of, because for me personally, I consider them two of the best generations in all of Pokemon, which is very telling that they're 8th and 7th place, even though technically it's a tie for 7th place because they're both 4 votes. So Generations 3 and Generations 2 are the weakest, worst generations, so that means they're the best of the worst, or worst of the best, whatever you want to call it. It's confusing, like I said. But yeah, they both got 4 votes for the worst generations of all time. I don't really see it, but due to the fact that they're this low on the list at the beginning of it, at least some fans agree with me, and yes, there you go. I can see some complaints that people have with those generations. They're not perfect. None of these generations are. But I can see why they're the lowest voted for generations, because they're some of the most hyped up, popular, beloved Pokemon generations. At 6th place with 5 votes, and this is another generation that kind of gets mixed, votes from people, is Generation 4, Sinnoh, the DS generation. A lot of people didn't like how slow the games initially were. Pearl and Diamond were very, very slow games. A lot of people said they didn't really like the Pokemon or the gym leaders or the region and whatnot. They said it improved with like Diamond, Pearl, and Platinum. They improved with Platinum, but like the initial games were weaker, and a lot of people didn't really like the region. For me personally, now I could see this getting some votes. I know a lot of people in the Pokemon fan base love Sinnoh. I was okay with Sinnoh. When the games first came out, I really liked it, but there was there's something in my brain. I'm not the biggest fan of Generation 4. I'm not really the biggest fan of Sinnoh. Will I get Sinnoh remakes if they ever make them? Yes, because I still like the generation, but it's one of my least favorite generations. Do I hate it? No. Do I think it's a weak generation? No. It's just a personal, I don't know, to me, I just didn't really like, it was like that first generation of Pokemon where I thought it was a major downgrade. I liked Kanto. That's iconic, beloved, region. I love Red and Blue and Yellow. I love Johto, and I love Hoenn. I love all those Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance games. But this was the first generation. I think that was a bit of a downgrade to me. For me, I thought it was like a plateauing up, and then it kind of dropped. That was me personally. But in terms of 5 people that voted as the worst generation, I think that was the main reason a lot of people voted for it, as that, because they didn't like the region or the slowness or like how it was also felt like it was like starting over, but you could still get Pokemon from Fire Red and Leaf Green in it. So unlike Hoenn, unlike Ruby and Sapphire and Emerald, you had more Pokemon available to you if you played the remakes of Generation 1. So yeah, there's some people out there that don't really like Generation 4 to the point where they say it's the worst generation of all time. I wouldn't go that far, but it's one of my weakest, as in least favorite generations. And basically the reasons they came up with were basically that. In 5th place, with 7 votes, is Generation 5, the other generation from the DS era. See, for me personally, this is my thoughts. I liked Gen 5 a little bit more than Gen 4 because I liked the concept of them jumping out of Japan and representing a different region, which they represented New York City, New York, and all that with Unova. And I thought the Pokemon, I think, were in some instances more interesting than Sinnoh, but also some instances more, were worse. But here's the thing though, I played Generation 5 less than Generation 4. I put a crap ton of hours in Generation 4. I played less than Generation 5. But I personally, in my view, I think Generation 5 is a little bit better because I liked Team Plasma. I liked N. I liked Getsus. I liked the story about what they were doing. The rival characters. The story just was more interesting. Way more in Generation 4 because I didn't really like Team Galactic at all. That I thought how many people push Aqua and Magma being the worst generation, Pokemon enemy teams. I think Team Galactic is one of the worst enemy teams. Besides their leader, the rest of them are very dull, pointless, bland, and forgettable. So, but Generation 5, a lot of people I think mentioned of this was they didn't really like how convoluted the story was. The story was way more in depth and way darker than a lot of previous generations. The Pokemon, they didn't like the Pokemon. They didn't like probably the different region. I forgot exactly what else they mentioned in that. Generation 5, they just, people like just didn't like it for some reason. And this, whether it's Black and White or Black and White 2, like they kind of, I thought it was maybe a little too convoluted too into the depths of like, because Generation 4 and 5 were, I think, really when they really started pushing like the abilities and like the league based and like professional Pokemon type stuff, and people were doing like leagues and really getting into IV training and all that crap, which I think started in 3 really, but 2 kind of show elements. But the DS generation, I think, that really did that. Generation 5, 7 people voted for it as the worst Pokemon generation of all time. I would certainly not go that far. I would say it's one of the better generations in my opinion, because I love the enemy team and whatnot, but I would also say it was like, I would personally put the DS era games, Generation 4 and 5, kind of lower on my list in terms of my favorites, because I like the Pokemon and whatnot, and like in reasons like that. But a lot of people basically said, that as the reason. Like they didn't really like how convoluted the story was. They thought it was a little bit much. They didn't like the rival. They didn't like the region or the Pokemon on it, or the gym leaders, or the game was a little too long, because the game was fairly long. It was a longer story, and they kind of drug it out with a lot of talking and whatnot too, and very, very information heavy base games. And I guess a lot of people didn't like the region being switched from Japan to like New York, which I thought it was really cool to finally get something different than a Japan region, which is they've been doing ever since Generation 5. So yeah, Generation 5 was voted fifth place. Generation 5 at fifth place of the worst Pokemon generations of all time. Now we are in the top 4, and this game in this generation getting this many votes tends to happen because a lot of people don't like how, namely the fan base from this generation, like the fanboys of this generation get. But I could see both sides of this, but this is also the generation that started it all, and at 11 votes was Generation 1, red, blue, and yellow. Or in Japan, green. So there you go. Yes, 11 votes for the first generation, the generation that started it all for Pokemon. And a lot of what I got from this was it's outdated now, it's a broken game, it's very glitchy, blah, 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 which is understandable because it came out in 96 in Japan, 97, 8 in America, and it's the first generation of its kind on the original Game Boy. It's had to start somewhere, and obviously they improved upon it since then. And a lot of people just said it's so overrated is the reason why it's one of the weakest generations. And like I said, the clunkiness and like how glitchy the game is, and it's just outdated now. Because I told people, like I said, not to include Fire and Leaf Green. Fire and Leaf Green improved Generation 1, improved Kanto so much. They were some of the best games on the Game Boy Advance. But I told people, don't include that in your reasoning. It is unfair, because you have to include where the generation actually was mainly started. And I can see why people don't like it, but that's also most of their timing, because as time goes on, things tend to improve, and the Pokemon had to start somewhere. So I don't entirely agree with these 11 people that voted as the worst Pokemon generation, but I can see where they're coming from, because it's like every generation since then, in some way, shape, or form, improved some stuff. As iconic and as nostalgic as we all are for Generation 1, it is, in my opinion, a fairly weak region, even though I love Kanto so much. We are in the top 3, and we're left, if you haven't noticed, we're left with the latest 3 generations. And if you've noticed the Pokemon fan base, they always go, like a lot of the later generations have gotten a lot of hate from the Pokemon fan base, from gamers. So let's see which one is the worst and which one's in top 3. But at third place with 12 votes is Generation 6. X and Y. What else can I say about that? Like, here's the thing for me, personally, before I get into other people's opinions. I liked Generation 6 quite a bit. It's what I think got me back into Pokemon, because I think the DS, in terms of video games, I always kind of was a fan of Pokemon, and the Generations 1, 2, and 3 were a huge part of my childhood moments back in elementary school and middle school. And then I get into Generation 4, which I was in high school, and going into college with Generation 5, and my interest in the game slightly plummeted. I liked some of the Pokemon. I liked how they did, like I said, Getsis and N and whatnot, and Team, Plasma and Generation 5 and Generation 4 was kind of good, but it was kind of like the moments where I thought the series started to get a little dull and boring a little bit, at least with 4, and then 5 kind of felt that way too. Like I said, I played Generation 5 a little bit less than Generation 4. But it's like, I think this game brought it back to me. But this generation, because I started playing this a lot more, I put a lot of time in Generation 6, and it got me back into this Pokemon video game since then, to go play the older ones and newer ones and everything else like that. Get me back into the anime and whatnot too, which I kind of fell off of that, the card game and everything, for a short period of time. Even though I still love Pokemon, it was just like one of those things where it's like, I wasn't playing it or was interested as much, but now this generation got me back into it. But Generation 6, the main thing I heard a lot of people say, and this is my complaint with the Generation 2, so I can see why it's so freaking high up on a worst Pokemon generations list, is it's so basic. After you have such a more interesting story with Generation 5, with Team Plasma trying to get people's Pokemons, acting like an activist group, we gotta save the Pokemon, and N and Getsis, and after all the Plasma stuff, and after all destroying the world thing, all you get from this is like, it's kind of a retread of like Team Rocket. It's a retread of like the earlier games, where it's like kids saving the day from evil organization, just destroy the world. And Team Flare was okay. Lysandre was okay. I actually would submit it's the same thing I say about Team Galactic. I love the team leader. I don't really like the team as a whole. Like, I'm not a big fan of Team Flare, but Lysandre is a cool freaking leader, and the story about him was kind of cool, but it was basic. It was like a retread going back to the earlier generations of Pokemon. And I think that's what a lot of people didn't like. Also, a lot of people didn't like that Generation 6 was so freaking easy. It was so easy. Even at least like Generations 3, 4, and 5, you had some sort of a challenge. Generations 1, 2, you had some sort of a challenge. Some parts were easy, but then some gym leaders and some Pokemon battles were pretty annoying. This game was freaking easy from start to end. And this is where the real easy stuff happened, because they had like the EV training, the EXP share, and all that stuff. Like, all your Pokemon get experience no matter if they're in the battle or not. So, and the Mega Evolutions, which as cool as they were, kind of made some battles really easy. So yeah, Generation 6 getting 12 votes and being number 3rd on the list of worst Pokemon generations, very understandable. Number 2 is going to go to, with 17 votes, the latest generation, Pokemon Generation 8, Sword and Shield. If you've been paying attention to Pokemon anytime recently, you would know exactly why this generation got a lot of hate since its release. They cut the content, they cut the Pokemon, they were kind of, the way they were advertising it, like everything these people, and then like the way, Game Freak and the Pokemon Company were acting and whatnot, as annoying as people were, and I won't condone what fans were saying online, Generation 8 cut a lot of stuff. As cool as Sword and Shield were, and them adding the new DLC storyline adaptations now, there's still a lot of missing Pokemon. But still, for a Generation 8, current generation, home console Pokemon game, it could be a lot more visually appealing, and more content they could have included into it. But I guess that might be Generation 9, because now they were getting used to the Switch hardware. But yeah, 17 votes, the second worst voted Pokemon generation. I could see it. I liked Sword and Shield, but I could see why it's a weaker generation. I definitely would never put it above Generations 3 or 2 or 5, even 1 or 4. So yeah, Generation 8, really, they were fun games. Good, I thought the rivals were pretty damn cool, like Marnie, and as underutilized as she was, and Bead and Hop, but it was kind of in the characters. One thing I love about Generation 8 is the characterization, like of Leon and all the other characters, but everything else was kind of meh. And also, it was just like I said with Generation 6, easy as hell, besides a few Pokemon battles. which obviously leaves to which generation we obviously know is the worst voted generation by the internet, by the people I polled at 25 votes. It's Gen 7. What else generation would it be? A lot of people do not like this generation. A lot of what they said, they didn't like the change to the Alola thing, the Pokemon League, the region, the glitchiness sometimes of the games. They didn't really like the gym leaders. They didn't like the characters. They thought the anime was better. At least I personally thought the Sun and Moon anime was a crap ton better than the games. The games were it was also super easy, just like Generations 8 and just like Generation 6, since the new generations of Pokemon are so freaking easy with the EXP share. A lot of people just didn't like the changes. They didn't like how many Pokemon we lost. They didn't like a lot of the newer Pokemon. They didn't really like the region that much, even though I thought it was kind of unique and different from a visual standpoint. From a standpoint of going through all these different trials and stuff, it just felt weird and different, even though I appreciated that. And when the game was first announced, I appreciated that, and I still do. I just think it could have been better executed. And a lot of people didn't really like Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, and the story and whatnot. The story was decent with Ether Foundation, but Team Skull was kind of bland outside of their leader, outside of all that. But it's obviously a generation that a lot of fans, Nintendo or otherwise, Pokemon fans or otherwise, just have a hatred for, and I can understand why. That Generation 7 is voted the worst Pokemon generation of all time. And with that being said, let's look at the final results. Even though you can't really see it probably that much. The top 8 worst Pokemon generations. At 8th place, in 7th place, because they're tied, with 4 votes each, Generations 3 and 2. Generation 4 is 5 votes at 6th place. 5th place is Gen 5 with 7 votes. 4th place is Gen 1 with 11. 3rd place is Gen 2 with 12. I couldn't read that for a second there. Gen 8 is at 2nd place with 17 votes, and at 25 votes, Generation 7 is voted the worst Pokemon generation by the fan base. And with that being said, put in the comment section what you guys think. Do you guys think these are the worst ones? Do you think it's ranked right? Do you agree with it? Put in the comment section what you guys think. What generation Pokemon do you think is the worst? And let's discuss it down there. I'll be back in a little bit for the best Pokemon generations. Bye, everyone.